Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. If, like me, you're fascinated by history, then my guest today is surely the person for you. His audiovisual series, Indians, A Brief History of Civilization, has enthralled millions each Saturday as its 10 episodes have gone public and then gone viral. Its depth of detail, balance, and perceptiveness are truly striking. In 10 easy half hours, it covers the entire sweep of history from the Indus Valley Civilization to the dawn of the British Age in the 17th and 18th centuries. Joining me now to talk about the series and what prompted him to write it is the author, scriptwriter, and anchor, Namit Arora. But before I talk to Mr. Arora, here is a glimpse of his fascinating series.
The Harappans may be long gone, but they still live deep inside us. Archaeology suggests that they practiced meditation, revered the peepal tree, used the swastika, and played dice and a game like chess. They used the matka, lota, thali, and ate laddus. They also built well-planned cities, pakka roads, and the first indoor toilets in the world. I'm Namit Arora. To get the big picture on the Harappans, check out the first episode of my history web series, Indians.
Namit Arora, I want to focus this interview on the incredible 10-part series that you're not just the author, scriptwriter, and anchor of, but actually the architect as well. What made you undertake this task? What prompted it?
Well, first, thank you for that introduction, Karan. I've admired your show for years, and I'm delighted to be on it today. When I was working on my book, Indians, on which the video series is based, I traveled to all the sites that I write about in the book. Even back then, I had this thought, wouldn't it be nice to bring alive these sites in a video series? I mean, not many people read books these days, and video has become something of a preferred medium for storytelling. So I captured video footage and pictures of the sites, which came in handy later. The book came out in early 21, and it did well. About a year ago, I was talking to Seema Chishti, the editor of The Wire, who asked me to write for them. And instead, I pitched the idea for this series. She had read the book, and she loved the idea. So I'm grateful to Seema for recognizing value in this idea and for commissioning this series.
Now, the amazing thing, Mr. Arora, is you're an engineer by training and a graduate of IIT Kharagpur. So how did you get drawn to history?
The interesting thing is I was never fond of history in school. I grew up in Gwalior in a middle-class milieu that herded kids through either engineering or medicine as the only two respectable career paths. I chose the engineering track, attended IIT Kharagpur, and got financial aid from a university in the US for further study in computer engineering. My interest in history really began at university in the US. I met people from all over the world, and it raised for me questions of culture and identity and made me want to understand India better. And after university, I started working in Silicon Valley, and I increasingly saw my work as a day job. It wasn't intellectually nourishing to me. So I often took unpaid leave from work and began traveling around the world. In particular, I was very captivated by lost cities that had been completely lost to memory and had to be dug out by archaeologists. I started learning how historians went about putting their past together, assembling their past. Then, about 20 years ago, my wife and I took 2 years off work to travel around India. We went all over, saw amazing sights, and we fell in love with India. The idea for this book was born back then. And some years later, with a bit more savings, we quit our jobs, moved to India, and transitioned full time into readers and writers. For me, a large part of it was focused on Indian history. So that's been my journey.
I suppose this means that your history is both self-taught and, more importantly, self-motivated. How easy or difficult was the self-motivation and the self-teaching?
Well, yes, that's true. I am not a professional historian. I only see myself as a lifelong student of history. I've been reading history for a long time, for 30 plus years, but there's still so much of our past that's opaque to me. There's just way too much to learn. I've consciously read a range of scholars spanning various schools of historiography, such as colonial, Marxist, liberal, subaltern, feminist, Ambedkarite, Hindutva, although to think of a Hindutva scholar is really an oxymoron. I also read works in other disciplines such as philosophy, sociology, economics. What became clear to me long ago is that historical explanations had to include all kinds of factors, from economic to cultural to ecological. And so I don't really identify with any single school, even as I have learned from various schools. On the whole, I would say it has not been a difficult journey. I feel I have ample intellectual freedom, and I'm less influenced by academic fads and institutional orthodoxies that arise from time to time, and so on.
But hearing that answer, I get the feeling that you're embarking on history meant not just an entire re-education of a Kharagpur IIT engineer, but a new education in a variety of fields, and a new education that has covered what I call the entire sweep of history, from the Indus Valley Civilization of 3000, 3500 BC, right up to the dawn of the British era in the 17th and 18th centuries. This is a mammoth task you undertook to perform for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I'm largely just self-taught in a way. There is no shortage of amazing things in Indian history, and I was drawn to it. There are big and small, fascinating things. If you take the rise and fall of the Harappans, the coming of the Aryans, the spread of Brahminism and the caste system, the rise and fall of Buddhism and Tantrism, the coming of Bhakti, Islam, new syncretic cultures. There is no dull moment in Indian history, and I was fascinated by all this churn and all this drama. So, when I started traveling to these ancient sites, I was also drawn into like these specific questions that fascinated me, like what was daily life in a Harappan city, and has anything of their culture come down to us? What sort of an urban milieu produced this great thinker like Nagarjuna, who I had come to admire greatly? What was a day in the life of a student at Nalanda? What worldview prompted these very graphic sexual scenes on temple walls, no less? And why did it disappear? So questions like this: how did the city of Vijayanagar become so rich? And these questions fascinated me and led me to dig deeper. And then I started connecting the dots across this large span. And that was my process.
Your answer makes something very clear. History is an attempt to answer questions that fascinate, sometimes questions that obsess you. But before I come to some of those questions, and I definitely want to go into them, several of them, in fact, I noticed from the inside cover of your book, and here it is, I'm holding it up so everyone can see it. In the inside cover, you have a statement that intrigues me. You say that Indian civilization is both an idea but also an enigma. I can understand the first, but I'm intrigued by the second. Do explain.
Well, I think we can all agree that there has been an Indian civilization that's pretty old, but it's harder to agree on what its central features and essential qualities are. We have so many social realities in this land which may not share any common idea of Indian civilization. Just think of Brahmins versus Dalits, city dwellers versus Adivasis, Pandits versus Gnostics, or Tantric gurus versus Bhakti saints, or feudal lords versus peasants, Tamils versus Mizos or Kashmiris. What I'm getting at is it's not likely that these folks ever subscribed to a common idea of Indian civilization. So who decides what Indian civilization consists of and what its core features are? And I mean, what is it? And that's what makes it an enigma.
But you're also suggesting that Indian civilization emerged not because of these contrasts, but despite them.
Absolutely. Yes, I would totally agree with that. Yes.
Let's then come at this point to some of the intriguing questions that your book answers. I can't go through all of them, but I want to pick up several of the more important ones. Episode 1 is about the Harappan civilization, or what in school I used to call the Indus Valley Civilization. And that civilization produced some very powerful images: the haunting dancing girl, the somber bearded Mohenjo-daro priest. But it also produced what are clearly well laid out cities with roads and public sanitation. How advanced a civilization was the Indus Valley civilization?
Yeah, I mean, there's two different aspects to it. I think the Harappans are, of course, famous for their urban planning, as you pointed out, water management, citywide drains. They built pakka roads and the first indoor toilets in the world. Dholavira has these amazing water harvesting systems and giant reservoirs. In all of this, the Harappans strike me as rather pragmatic and creative techies. Their achievements in water engineering weren't exceeded for 2,000 years until Roman times. So they have these, technical advancements, I would say, but I think their biggest advancement may have been on the social front. I mean, if you take other Bronze Age civilizations of the time, the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians, compared to them, the Harappans were substantially egalitarian. And there you just don't see huge differences in the size of their homes or in their access to public goods like wells and sanitation, or in the quality of their burial goods in the graves. And you compare that with the lavish burial sites of chambers of the Egyptian pharaohs, where even slaves were buried with them. There's nothing like that in the Harappan realm. Among the Harappans, there is not even any clear evidence of temples or a priestly class. There is no evidence of war in their art, nor very clear weapons of war. Several of their seals depict people in yogic meditative poses, and in one seal under a bodhi tree. Very intriguing stuff. So it's quite possible that some of our current speculations may turn out to be wrong, but for now, in so many of these ways, the Harappans are my favorite Bronze Age civilization.
Tell me, Mr. Arora, this group of people, this civilization that you intriguingly call advanced techies and who were extremely egalitarian in their social customs and practices, did they not have a concept of elites?
They did have a social hierarchy which comes through. So there are, if you look at the layouts of their towns, there are some quarters which are better endowed than the others. The key difference I'm pointing to is the relative differences are much smaller compared to other ancient civilizations. So they did have social elites, but the gaps, it was much flatter than other ancient civilizations.
Could one call them proto-socialists?
We don't know enough to understand what their system was, but it's at this point, it's just very suggestive and intriguing.
Now, we've never been able to decipher the Harappan language. Many attempts have been made, but they've all been defeated. Why have we failed?
Well, the main reason is that we haven't been able to find a Rosetta Stone-like artifact that can help decipher the script. And without it, the task is pretty hard. It's possible we may one day find such an artifact most likely in Mesopotamia. The Harappans traded with them extensively and were known as the people of Meluha over there. But there is also a minority view that the Harappan symbols may not represent a linguistic script at all. In other words, the symbols may not encode a spoken language and might represent another form of symbolic communication, like something akin to our own traffic signs. They convey information, but they are not language, or branding marks that they may have used in trade. But, there's no consensus. And for now, the script remains a mystery and with no final resolution in sight.
Now, you also grapple with what is today clearly a contentious political question, the Aryans. You take the clear position that they came in waves of migration from the steppes of Central Asia, that they weren't really indigenous to this part of the world. Briefly, can you explain why you're convinced this is the right view?
Well, I think you put it well. It's a contentious political question. It's not a question of scholarship. Now, among the scholars worldwide, this question has long been settled in favor of the Aryan migration theory. Earlier, this consensus was based on linguistics and archaeology. It was based on things like the study of the spread of Indo-European languages and associated cultures originating from the Yamanaya people in the grasslands of southern Russia and Ukraine. It was also based on the lack of archaeological evidence of things like horses or Vedic fire altars in the Harappan world. The Harappans and the Indo-Aryans are simply too different to have been the same people. Now, in recent years, of course, the Aryan migration theory has been rigorously confirmed by genetic science. Multiple studies have appeared in peer-reviewed publications like Cell and Science, and these are done by large international teams of experts, including some Indians. They leave no doubt that the Aryans migrated into India soon after 2000 BCE, and they brought with them so many of the things that some people today associate with the roots of Hinduism, things like proto-Vedas, Vedic gods, Sanskrit, a priestly class, fire rituals and oral chants, some sort of reverence for the cow, and even horses and chariots. People who still think that the Aryans were indigenous to India are mostly today Hindutva ideologues who either lack basic scientific temper or are led by more cynical political considerations. And
sorry, please carry on. My apologies.
And I was just going to say, and the misinformation on this really abounds. I bet that after this video, beneath this video, some folks will leave half-baked comments like, what about the chariots of Sinoli? But let me preempt that by saying that to them that there are no chariots in Sonali. There are cattle carts with solid wheels, not spoked wheels, that are the hallmarks of chariots. At least some of them, these folks should read the Wikipedia page on Sonali. So, that's my take on this question.
I love that riposte. At least read the Wikipedia page on Sonori. That is a wonderful, delightful put down. Now, the middle episodes of your series focus on South India. And one of the most remarkable episodes is the one you have on the Vijayanagar Empire. And this, as I watched these episodes, brought to my mind a concern that is also partly political. It said that Indian history, as taught, doesn't really focus enough on the kingdoms of the south. Instead, it's largely about what's happened north of the Vindhyas. Is that a correct critique of the way history is taught?
I do have some sympathy for that view, although it's less true today than it was some decades ago. A similar case can be made about the Northeast, history of the Northeast. It's true that a certain North centricity exists in our cultural valuation, and Northerners don't seem too interested in the Southerners, who are often all seen as Madrasis. We can wonder what might be some reasons for this bias. And the North, one possibility is the North has had a lot more political power across time. Perhaps also because many more of our dominant cultural ideas have traveled from the North to the South, including the big religions of Brahmanism, Buddhism, Jainism. And this likely bred hubris and insularity among North Indians. And this attitude actually seems pretty old. I mean, it seems to be present even in the Ramayana, which shows no cultured human societies south of the Vindhyas. All we see are Rakshasas and humanoid monkeys. So there's so much behind the complaint you highlighted, and I do have some sympathy for it.
Now, Mr. Arora, my memory of history in school is the belief that there were two great rulers that India has had. The first, Ashok, in around 300 BC, the second, Akbar, in the middle part of the 16th century. To what extent is that belief correct? And to what extent is it either a distortion or just uninformed?
My personal view is that, I'm in general not a big fan of imperial states, which tend to be violent, extractive, and predatory. All empires are like that. They focus on expansions through war and have coercive policies for residents. Both Ashok and Akbar presided over such imperial states. So that part of their persona, I don't find admirable. But having said that, they did have qualities that put them head and shoulders above most other rulers in the subcontinent. I discuss Ashok in episode 3 and Akbar in episode 9. And I cite many good reasons for why we should regard them as great rulers.
Very briefly, what are those?
So for Ashok, I would say, he articulated an ethos that later came to be identified with the Indian idea of secularism, where you patronize multiple faith systems equally. And then, of course, his turn towards nonviolence was significant and genuine, and likely pretty unique in the history of compared to other emperors around the world. And with Akbar too, he was curious and tolerant, and he co-opted a lot of people rather than in his orbit, rather than destroy them. And which is why you see in his court and in his family, you have these marital alliances, and then his own experiments with Deen-e-Ilahi type of religious experimentations suggest he was a much more open-minded and a liberal sort of an emperor, which is worth valuing and highlighting.
Now, Ashok and Akbar are widely admired, quite unlike Aurangzeb, who is a hate figure for the present government ruling us today. But was Aurangzeb a fanatic or a bigot? Or is Audrey Trushka correct in interpreting him very significantly differently? What's your view of him yourself?
Well, I do see Aurangzeb as a fanatic and a bigot. His brother, Dara Shikoh, had a similar view of him. But there is also another reality, and that of his actual record, including what we learned from contemporary travelers like Francois Bernier, and I cover that in episode 9. And that's where a lot of contradictions come in, which require careful study. For instance, we know that he used torture and forced conversions, but he seems to have been, all that seems to have been limited to specific political rivals. We know that he broke many temples, but he also financed the construction of many new ones. There are serious scholars today who attribute only 15 verified cases of temple desecrations to Aurangzeb, which is nowhere near the number that the Hindu rite alleges. You know, whatever his inner demons, his religious bigotry seems to have been moderated by the fact that he ruled a large and diverse land where close to 90% of the people were non-Muslims. You know, he had to be pragmatic. Most people don't realize that Aurangzeb had the largest percentage of Hindus in his administration and nobility, larger than any previous Mughal ruler. And that included Rajputs, Marathas, Brahmins, Kayas, and others. You know, this helped moderate his behavior. So, while I dislike Aurangzeb, clearly, I support scholars who try to humanize him and study him as a complex human being, rather than see him as some sort of a monster that he's often made out to be.
So would I be right in concluding that whilst Aurangzeb was a fanatic and a bigot, he was also a complex and complicated human being, and there are multiple layers to understanding him, and you need to see them all together, not just focus on one or two?
Very well stated, yes.
Something else I noticed is that your series relies very extensively on the use you've made of the accounts of foreign travelers. People like Al-Biruni, Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta, Bernier, Megasthenes. How important are these foreign travelers who view India through non-Indian lenses in enriching our knowledge of what was happening at the time? And secondly, how reliable are they?
Well, the accounts of foreign travelers are an important source in Indian history, and the stark reality is that Indian historical sources decline in abundance as we go further back, and that's where the travelers are most useful. For example, the Chinese travelers of the 7th century are particularly useful as they've provided us the only detailed accounts of life at Nalanda. It was through their travelogues that many of the Buddhist sites that we know of in India today were discovered by British archaeologists in the 19th century. And how reliable are they? That varies a lot. All of them had their own personal and cultural prejudices and blind spots, just as we do when we travel to, say, Vietnam or Brazil. We take that along with us. And many of them didn't stop long enough to learn local languages. So things sometimes got lost in translation. Some of them, you were writing for an audience back home and exaggerated some things to spice it up. So you have these issues. But some travelers are clearly more reliable than others. For example, Al-Biruni, who was a sober scholar, learned Sanskrit, read the major works of Hinduism, and conversed with the people to genuinely try to create a better understanding of Hindus among the Persians. In general, historians also look at other contemporary sources to assess whether an account makes sense, a traveler's account. And they also evaluate the inner logic of their accounts, the internal consistency, and to assess its quality. And at the end of the day, it is partly also an art to decide what to trust and what to quietly pass over.
So you're not just reading an account of a travel by someone like, say, Al-Biruni or Ibn Battuta or Megasthenes. You're assessing it all the time, and you're asking yourself the question as you read it: how much do I accept? How much do I dispute? How much do I question? And more importantly, is this a true reflection of what he saw?
Yes, all of those things. Yes.
Now, your series stops before the Raj starts. Why did you choose that particular point to end?
Two reasons. First, my book, this Indians book, is anchored around 6 lost cities to which I traveled and I told their stories, along with mixing it with the accounts of several foreign travelers. This format didn't extend well into the modern period. And the second reason was that the modern period it's a whole different beast. And I didn't feel confident of tackling it just yet. And I thought I would split the task to do justice to this latter period. And my hope is that I will come out with a sequel provisionally. Currently, I've titled it Modern Indians: How Modernity Transformed a Civilization. It's still in very early stages.
I'm fascinated to hear that there is a sequel, at least in your mind, and you're working upon it with a lot of diligence. When can we expect Modern Indians?
No timelines. I think it's at least a couple of years away.
So for the next 2 years, you know what you're going to be doing, and patient, diligent, hard work is what lies ahead of you.
Yes.
The amazing thing, and I suppose this is my last question, is that your viewership of the series, and since I have played a glimpse of the series at the start of this interview, I'll hold up the book the series is based upon once again. The viewership of the series based on this book has broken what I call the India-Pakistan barrier. And that is a barrier that many people think is becoming increasingly impregnable. But you've pretty effectively shattered it. Pervez Hoodboy, the famous Pakistani physicist, organized an entire discussion around your episode on Al-Biruni, Marco Polo, and Ibn Battuta. And the discussion and the questions from the audience, and it was house full, by the way, lasted for almost 2 hours. Were you surprised by the enthusiastic response from Pakistan?
Yes, I was surprised by the interest, but I was also very happy that it came from Pervez Hoodboy, whose courage and humanity I have a great admiration for a long time. And I was also very happy with the quality of the questions I got from his audience. So yes, surprised and delighted.
And a sure sign that whatever the political differences, cultural curiosity between the two sides continues and grows.
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Arora, thank you very much for making time for me. I, like the rest of the audience, greatly look forward to Modern India. If you can shorten the time span, please do. A couple of years is a long time to wait, but we will wait patiently and anxiously to see it. Take care. Stay safe.
Thanks for having me, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.